Stand to Reason, ladies and gentlemen, that's the show, and I'm glad you've joined me. I'm Greg Koukl, your host, with you every week for 3 full hours. This, on my clock here, being the second. Not sure on your clock. Maybe it's your first hour. All 3 hours available, str.org, and encourage you to podcast. That's the best way to get it. You can also go to iTunes if you like, and look up Stand to Reason. So let's go to New York. And Matt, and welcome, Matt. I didn't have to. Hey, wait a minute. Welcome, Matt. That's
Hi, Greg. How's it going?
I don't mean to call you a welcome, Matt. Thinking, it just occurred to me when I said welcome, Matt. That didn't sound so good. Matt, welcome. How about that?
Sounds good. How you doing?
Okay, I'm doing fine. And so we're just going to jump right in instead of me jabbering for a while, and I want to talk about what you want to talk about.
Okay, well, thanks for taking my call. You actually touched on what I'm about to ask with the last caller. Okay, just so you know, I am a Christian, even though this question might sound as if I'm not, just so you know.
Okay. That's all right, even if you were not. There's no problem there. I'll entertain whatever you have to say, but thank you for letting me know. Sometimes it's good for us to, in a certain sense, either play out our doubts with others and be honest about them or our questions, or even to play the other side just to see how we do in responding to the other side's issues. So I have no problem with whatever you're about to say.
Okay, thanks. The Bible tells us in Hebrews 6:18 that it's impossible for God to lie. Mm-hmm. And then in James 1:13, it says that God cannot be tempted by evil.
Right.
Now, I feel like we measure rightness and wrongness, or love and evil, based on the fact that one has the option to do either right or wrong. So I'm just wondering how, if God cannot do anything wrong, like just how loving or right his decisions are.
How noble is that?
Especially if it's an impossibility for him to even do wrong.
Okay, well, this is one of those questions where I start salivating a little bit because I mean in a good sense, I realize I am so thankful that I have had some training in philosophy by people like J.P. Moreland and the rest of the fine men over at Talbot, because it is that training that allows me to kind of thread through a very fair question like yours. All right?
Okay.
So, I want to talk first about freedom, because your question touches just a little bit on freedom, and then I want to talk more directly about 2 different ways of understanding goodness. Freedom, there are 2 ways of looking at actual freedom. You could say a person is free if he gets to do what he wants, okay? And if I probably put that out to you as a kind of a rough and ready definition of freedom, you probably would agree. I think there's an intuitive sense that that's the case. But some other guys have thought about this for a little longer, and they said, well, wait a minute, it's not just doing what you want. It seems to me, even if you did what you wanted, but there was no possibility in any way, shape, or form that you could have done otherwise, if you had wanted to do otherwise, then that's not real freedom. And so they add this additional condition that philosophers call the CDO condition, the could have done otherwise condition. True freedom is doing what you want when you could have done otherwise. Okay, now that is called libertarian freedom.
Okay.
Now, does God have libertarian freedom in the area of morality? My response would be no, he does not, because his nature is perfect, and it is not possible for him to fail. So he cannot choose to fail, and sin would be moral failing. So one might argue, and maybe somebody like William Lane Craig would want to tutor me a little bit on this. He'd agree with my general point that God was perfect and couldn't sin, but he might say that is a different issue than libertarian freedom. But for the time being, let's just say if libertarian freedom simply means he could have done otherwise, which means he could have failed, then he can't have failed morally, then he doesn't have libertarian freedom at least with regards to that thing. Maybe there are many other things that God could have done otherwise, so he exercises libertarian freedom in other decisions. But on moral decisions, he always acts from within his nature. His nature is perfectly good, so he always does the good thing, ergo the verses that you cited at the beginning. Okay, you with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Now let's go to the heart. So I'm just going to bite the bullet and say, well, God couldn't have done otherwise. I don't think that's a liability, and that's governed a little bit by this second issue. In ethics, there are different ways to understand how the moral project works. And this isn't going to be real esoteric and fancy schmancy philosophy. I'm going to have a few names in here, but I think the concepts will make sense to you. They'll be useful concepts, okay? They won't just be hoity-toity philosophical things, okay? One way of looking at morality is when we choose the thing that is hard for us to do, but it's the right thing. And so we could have done otherwise, and we might have done otherwise, and we might have even wanted to do otherwise in a certain sense, but we mustered up our willpower to rather do the right thing and fulfill our obligation or our duty. But incidentally, I think this is the way that most people think of morality. And I think there's merit to that. I think that this helps us understand certain aspects of morality. We have a duty, and we do the right thing. Notice how when somebody, and you say, oh, well, thank you for doing me that favor. And what do people say, in a sense, dismissively in response? And they say, hey, thank you for helping me out. And they say what?
You're welcome.
No. They say, well, they might say that, but it's a dismissive thing they say. You say, oh, if I said to you, Matt, thank you for carrying that box. You say, oh, don't worry. And what do you say? It was nothing. It was
okay. I got you, yeah.
It's probably easier than you thought. You're thinking too hard. Yeah, it was nothing. It was no big deal. No, I didn't have to go out of the way at all. I was on my way already. And what we are saying to people is, don't credit me for a lot of goodness because I didn't try that hard. That's kind of what we're saying, and we understand that because, I think it's a genuine kind of humble thing to say, and we're just trying to minimize. But notice the way we're minimizing it. We're saying, oh, it wasn't really hard for me to do, so it can't be considered a great goodness because it wasn't hard to do. Now, if I had really put myself out and sacrificed, like if I put my life on the line to help you out, Matt, well, that would have been heroic. That would have really been something because it would have been hard to face the dangerous situation, yet you did it anyway. And I think those are genuinely good things, but I just want you to see how we're measuring it. The easier it is, the less credit we give to it, and the harder it is if we do the really hard thing out of duty, out of sense of obligation, proper obligation, then that's considered a great act. Now, that way of looking at it actually reflects, I think, the point of view on morality of a philosopher from the 19th century, or maybe 17th, early 19th century, named Immanuel Kant. And he said that morality is duty, and we have to do our duty. Even when it's hard, we do our duty kind of thing. Aristotle had a different sense about it. For Aristotle, the most noble person wasn't the one who did his duty against all other impulses. The most noble person is the person who did what was right because he enjoyed it. He did what was right because it was satisfying to him that his character had such virtue that he wanted to do the good for the goodness' sake. Now, when you think about that, this is just the opposite of Kant, by the way, because in this sense, the easier it is to do the good thing, the more noble you are because it's showing how it is a natural thing for you to do. So when I think that when people, his view is called virtue ethics, by the way. Ethics is determined by what a virtuous person is like, not what the duty demands. Okay? So
Yep.
you have really two different kinds of perspectives. I actually think both of them play a role in moral growth. I think we start out responding by duty, but when we become habituated to doing the right thing, as Aristotle points out, it becomes a habit and it becomes part of us, and then we do the right thing for its own sake, and it's satisfying for us to do the good thing. Okay? And my sense, I'm weighing in here. I think that's the higher form of the two. The duty-based ethic is a place to start, but it's not a place to end. What you want to do is become a virtuous person where doing the good is a response of your own nature, and it is deeply satisfying to do what's right, and it's easier to do what's right. Okay? And I think most people, if they really were given the opportunity to reflect, oh, well, there's two different ways. Okay, hey, you got a point there, Koukl. All right. I can see how being a virtuous person, doing it from the goodness of your nature, and therefore enjoying it and not slaving at accomplishing your duty, enjoying it, that's actually what we're after. And I think this is what Jesus was after too. We start from duty, we transform the character, and then we become the virtuous person. Okay? So now this, maybe you're already seeing where I'm going with this with regards to your question. Because in God's case, God is the perfectly virtuous being. He does nothing out of duty, nothing out of obligation. He has no obligations. He himself is the standard of goodness, and he lives out his goodness in everything he does because he is good by nature, which is the reason that he's most worthy of praise, not because he has all these conflicting emotions and he wants to do the bad, but he's got the strong willpower to do the good. We don't praise him because he wills the good. We praise him because he is good. So I think that back to your simple question, how can that be loving of God if he can't ever do anything wrong? Or how can that be morally meaningful? And I'm saying on one take of it, which I think is a richer take on morality, it's clear that he is the most good because he can't err in that way. He is deeply and richly and profoundly good in a thoroughgoing way. It is the highest kind of goodness, in fact, that he can't do otherwise. He is the perfect virtuous being from the virtue ethics perspective. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I know. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you. And do I have just one more minute to ask you something real quick?
Sure. It's probably going to take me about 10 more minutes to answer it, but no, I'll try to make it short. Go ahead.
With the last caller, you had said, I think you had said that Jesus, in your opinion, was maybe not capable of sinning. Is that right?
I don't think he was capable of sinning. He was not, in fact, capable because he is one person with two natures. The one person of Jesus, the one that is making the decisions, has the divine nature, shares the divine nature, and God cannot sin. If the one person of Jesus were to sin, then God would be sinning. And it's impossible for God to sin. Now, this raises other difficulties, like how were the temptations meaningful, et cetera.
Right.
There are ways to answer them. Maybe that is your question. I don't know.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of headed. Yeah.
Well, the way I'm going to stick to I would rather not be able to answer that question than to be stuck with the idea that God could sin, because that seems to go directly against the Scripture. So, but I will venture a guess on this, and I have no firm conviction about an answer to this, but I had heard someone suggest, though Jesus could not have sinned, it may be that he didn't know he couldn't sin.
Mm-hmm.
That's what somebody said. His knowledge was limited, and we know that, and that recreates its own conundrums. But now, having said that, I'm wondering, wait a minute. Then if he didn't know, he couldn't sin, and then he thought he could, and he had a struggle against it in the power of the Spirit, well, then that would be a real struggle. But how could he know he could? How could he not know he couldn't sin? Because he did know he was God. He did know he was God. We have statements of his all through the New Testament,
Right.
Gospels. So now I'm thinking twice about that alternative. Maybe that's not such a good answer to your question, which means I don't have an answer to your question. But I'd rather be stuck with your question than the opposite, which is, I know how he could struggle with sin because he really could sin. He really actually could have sinned. And then I'm going to say, how could God have sinned?
Mm-hmm.
That to me is higher up on the pecking order, so I'm going with the more weighty concern. I'm weighing in on the side of the sinless divinity of Christ, and then I'll let somebody else worry about the problem that it creates, because I think the problem it creates is less, in my case, than the alternative.
Okay. Yeah.
Fair enough, Matt?
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
All right, you're welcome. I appreciate your call. Sometimes that's what you have to do, friends. You got to just, make your decision as to what you're going to live with in terms of difficulties. And theology is not tidy, okay? Theology is not tidy. There's always going to be loose ends in every theology and in every worldview. And that's because I think we live in a fallen world, and even our minds are fallen, and our ability to know is fallen, and understand the truth, that's fallen. And so we can just do a partial job at best, which leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Conundrums, uncertainties. But that doesn't mean that our general view of reality is false, because every view has those conundrums. And you just kind of have to go on with the odds-on favorites and the big things, and then just live with the at least for the time being, until you work them out, with the loose ends. All righty, 855-243-9975 is the number to call during the live show, which is Tuesdays from 4 until 7. Let's go to break, and then more of your calls after this on Stand to Reason.
At Stand to Reason, we depend on the support of donors to carry on our mission to equip Christian ambassadors, and your non-cash donation items can help. You can transform your old cars, cell phones, or other items into ministry impact by donating them to Stand to Reason. Think of it. Because of your donation, Christians just like you will be able to effectively share their faith and change the lives of others forever. To make non-cash donations of all kinds to Stand to Reason, call iDonate at 877-897-4273 or go to idonate.com and visit STR's page. They'll take care of everything for you and Stand to Reason. Just call them at 877-897-4273 or visit idonate.com. Thank you very much for making Stand to Reason's work possible.
Greg Koukl here, Stand to Reason, the show, with you every week, 3 hours. I don't know where your live show is at, my live show, I should say your tape show, when it's airing, but I used to just say with you Sundays from 3 until 6, but can't do that anymore because that's not when I'm broadcasting. But I am broadcasting live on Tuesdays from 4 until 7, and that's when I take your live calls at 855-243-9975. Let's go to Virginia. And Matthias, welcome to the show. Glad you called. Hi.
Thank you for taking my call, Greg.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I just want to say your ministry has been really helpful to me and helped me think clearly about a lot of issues, and one of those being a same-sex marriage.
Okay.
And I don't know if you heard recently, but the Arizona legislature passed legislation that would allow individuals and businesses to deny same-sex couples service due to religious beliefs. So this would be like, wedding cake or flowers for a wedding, and it might even be beyond that.
So this is, just for clarification for me, this is, I did not hear about this until just about 10 minutes ago. The enforcer gave me a couple of articles, gave me a little quick rundown during a break, and I I'm happy to hear that. I want you to, I'd like to get a little more detail. She gave me like 2 articles, and I'm not a speed reader, but she did give me the substance of it, and she's going to be posting those on Twitter so that those who want can access them. One from Kirsten Powers, who is a reporter on these issues, is generally even-handed, but is not happy with this law. Another by Russell Moore, who is responding to Kirsten Powers and Jonathan Merritt, who wrote another article. I guess they both are the authors of this one particular piece in the U.S. News. So there's controversy back and forth in here. What I want to know is, does this Arizona law give protection with regards to same-sex marriage ceremonies themselves, or does it have something to do with homosexuality specifically? Is it the ceremony that it addresses and things related to the same-sex marriage ceremony? Is that right?
From what I've read, it is intended to be regarding the same-sex ceremony, but the wording might allow for more broad discriminations, or the articles I read mentioned, hotel owners could turn away same-sex couples, or restaurants, or things like that. And so, the way it's been being portrayed in the media anyway is that way, that this is, the Christians or the right singling out same-sex couples for discrimination and bringing back Jim Crow and all this kind of thing.
I'm looking at the first paragraph here, the first sentence indeed, of the Powers Merritt article. It says that it would allow individuals and businesses in the state to deny service to same-sex couples due to religious beliefs. And at least that's the way they are summarizing it. Maybe they go into give more precision as they go on, but the enforcer gave me a couple of examples that they cited that they think are like parallel. For example, would you bake a cake for a homosexual who's having a birthday? Could services be denied? Would you do that? Evangelical Christians. So part of the pushback is apparently you Christians are not being consistent on this issue, and this is just an inappropriate act of discrimination, like you said, Jim Crow laws. So,
right.
And so you're calling to ask my opinion on this?
Well, it's basically the crux of my question is, does the act itself of providing a wedding cake or selling flowers mean that the Christian business owner is necessarily affirming same-sex marriage? And if so, is there inconsistency there if the same owner is providing flowers to other couples getting married in non-biblical fashion, like say if it's unequally yoked believers, or a divorced couple is getting remarried and they were unbiblically divorced, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, okay, that's a fair question. I think that my first reaction is that these illustrations you just offered are not, in fact, parallel. It is not possible for anybody doing business with anybody to get an accurate survey on the moral activities of the individuals they're serving, nor would it be appropriate, it seems to me. Okay, so I mean, maybe there are marriages, like you said, that are unequally yoked and the like, but I don't know how a person giving a service is going to, a Christian giving a service to that is going to know that. And however, it still is a marriage. In the case of same-sex couples, it's not a marriage in my view. Same-sex marriage is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms, because marriages are not things we define; they're things we describe. And that's like saying gravity where bodies push each other apart rather than attract. Well, that's not gravity; it's something else. And so I think the same thing is true here. And plus, it's not just a contradiction in terms; it's a violation from the perspective of a Christian. And let me back up for just a second. I think it's a contradiction of terms because of the way nature is structured, reality is structured. You don't have to have any religious convictions whatsoever to be able to see what reality is like in this regard. However, a Christian, or a biblical theist can ground it further. They can say, well, this is the reason that reality is the way it is. God made things for certain purposes and certain reasons, and this is a convolution of that. And because of my commitment to that God, I do not want to participate in the distortion of that thing. I do not want to be party to that thing. Now, in the case of same-sex marriage, every single so-called same-sex marriage would be an example of that kind of a corruption of something that God purposed. Now, somebody might say, well, that's your personal opinion. And to which I respond, exactly. And I'm the one who gets to decide if I want to give my services in support of that or not. If that's not your opinion, then you help these people and celebrate with them if you'd like. But an individual ought to have I think, the liberty to say no to being party to things that they find morally offensive. They ought to. See, now this is so different, though, than Jim Crow laws, because skin colors has nothing to do with morality. Nothing. Who would say such a thing? Who would say that because a person has a certain skin color, then they are immoral? But a same-sex marriage is an activity, and homosexuality is an activity that falls under, at least arguably falls under, immoral and destructive behavior. And so they're totally different kinds of things. A person can choose not to have that behavior, not to participate in that behavior. A person can't choose not to have the skin color they have, the race, if you will. A person can choose look at even same-sex attraction, though not chosen, in my view, at least, is not immutable. It is not a function of their nature. They are not born gay. There is no gay gene. There's no evidence for that. All the evidence points to developmental things, and it's mutable. People change all the time. Highly politically incorrect to say it, but that happens. I saw letters last week written by people who had been gay and changed and got married and had kids. I saw letters, stacks of letters of it. So I know this happens, and this has been happening even since Freud. Freud said the same thing. So we got tons of evidence there. So since it's not immutable, and since the behavior can be not chosen, and since the condition itself can change, this is not a human rights class action. And so I think that, look at if a Christian doesn't want to make a cake for a wedding of somebody who he thinks shouldn't be getting married, like maybe an unequally yoked situation, why shouldn't that Christian have that liberty not to participate? Why do you think? Doesn't it seem to make sense that they should have even if they did that under those circumstances?
No, I think they should have that liberty. I agree with you. I think the question is, are the Christian business owners, are we holding the same standard where we'll refuse service to those people equally, or I think the contention is from the other side that we're singling out the same-sex relationships.
Well, my response to that, and this is going to sound a little cheeky, but my response to that is it's none of their business. And here's what I mean by that: it's none of anybody else's business trying to decide whether I am in my rights to say no to something that morally offends me, that I choose not to participate in. Even though they think there are other parts of my life where I am not living consistently with that. Ultimately, I have to make my own decisions about the actions that I take in light of my own conscience. And if this seems to me to be a clear case example of promoting something that I think is wrong, and therefore I become party to something that I think is wrong, then I ought to be allowed to opt out, even though you might see, or anyone else might see, Kirsten Powers or Jonathan Merritt or anybody else might be able to probe into my life and say, well, you didn't do it in this other case. Well, maybe I didn't, and maybe it just feels differently to my conscience. Maybe the other cases aren't parallel. there is no parallel between a same-sex marriage and a birthday of a homosexual person, because there's nothing immoral about birthdays. And by making a cake for a homosexual person, you're not celebrating his homosexuality, you're celebrating his birthday, or you're participating in celebrating that, right? But when it comes to making cakes and flowers and whatever else for same-sex marriages, you are participating in that thing that you think is wrong. And one ought to be able to be allowed to opt out. Now, what's kind of interesting about this, and just for the record, the article in the U.S. News from the 23rd, that's 2 days ago, right? Yeah. Conservative Christians selectively apply biblical teachings in the same-sex marriage debate. Kirsten Powers and Jonathan Merritt. The response is the same day, February 23rd. On Weddings and Conscience, Are Christians Hypocrites? And the author is Russell Moore, M-O-O-R-E. Double S, double L there, Russell. And both on Twitter, so you can check that out if you want to get the point-counterpoint on this one. But my appeal here, Matthias, is just for people to be able to see the obvious difference between a birthday and a same-sex marriage. You know what? When you think about it, the sexual preference is irrelevant in each case, because what is being, in a sense, discriminated against is not the homosexuality, but the perversion of marriage. Let's just say I would not provide services to a same-sex union, okay, between two gay people, all right? What if somebody told me that they're not gay? What? No, they're not gay. They're heterosexual, and they're just going through this service because there's some benefit that accrues to them. But they're not sexually interested in each other. They're just kind of going through the motions to get the license and to get some benefits that befall these committed bachelors who are heterosexual. Well, you know what? I still wouldn't give flowers to that thing. I wouldn't participate, because the objection for me, at least, and I suspect for a lot of other people, is not that they're gay, but that this is a same-sex marriage, which itself is a corrupting of an institution that is vital to our culture and has theological ramifications for a lot of people too. And therefore, they wouldn't want to participate in it. The case in New Mexico, I don't know if you knew this, Matthias, when the New Mexico Supreme Court weighed in on this against a florist situation just like this. In that New Mexico case, the people regularly served homosexuals in their floral shop. They had no objections to selling flowers to gay people. They had an objection for participating with flowers in a same-sex wedding. It was an objection to the wedding, not an objection to the homosexuals that were involved in the wedding. That's the distinction. Nobody objects to birthdays, so it doesn't matter whether the guy's gay or straight, you make a cake. But the objection here, regardless if the participants are gay or straight, the objection is to the ceremony and the perversion of an institution that for many people also has divinely inspired underpinnings. And therefore, that would be a perversion of their obligation to God as well. And so they want to say no. So those are the reasons I think it's apples and oranges here. The comparison is not a fair one that Kirsten Powers and Jonathan Merritt apparently are making. What do you think?
Okay, well, those are some great distinctions that you make, and so I wonder, would it be fair to say then the objection isn't even to the behavior of the couple in question? The objection is just to trying to change the institution of marriage.
Well, I think that would be a principled objection that could legitimately be raised. I don't know in every case if people aren't also uncomfortable with gays and they therefore don't want to interact and do business with them, okay? I don't know if that isn't lurking in the background. It may or may not be. The point I'm making, though, is an objection to the institution and participating in the ceremony is adequate reason, regardless of one's feelings about gays. It is adequate reason to give that person the liberty to opt out. There's always going to be somebody else who can take the business. That's not a problem. But this is a principled objection on something that it matters. And, if it weren't for actions like the Supreme Court of New Mexico, which is the state right next door to Arizona, if it weren't actions like that, where the Supreme Court justice said, I read it here on the air, and this is almost an exact quote, these people, the florists, must say no to their religious beliefs in order to keep the law. Does that send a chill up your spine, Matthias?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's scary rhetoric.
Yeah, well, it's more the rhetoric. In this case, it was the rationale for their judgment against the florists. So, this has teeth to it, So anyway, if this is the irony, if people would have been fair and even-handed to begin with, and not forced lawsuits on people who wanted to opt out for conscience sake, and not try to bully people, then there wouldn't have been laws like this in Arizona that may not now be well written, and may in fact have consequences down the line that look a little like Jim Crow. I don't know.
Don't they call that tolerance?
Tolerance, did you say? Is that what you said?
Yeah, isn't that what tolerance should be in the ways you talk about it?
I'm with you on this. I think, no, it's a good point. I think, why not tolerate the people who are uncomfortable with promoting these things for conscience sake? Why not tolerate them? Because tolerance is a one-way street for the left. And if they would have just exercised some common sense here and let people opt out for conscience reasons, then there wouldn't be these laws being passed. But now these laws have to be passed. Frankly, I don't know why you shouldn't be able to so-called discriminate against a homosexual. Can I discriminate against somebody with heterosexual desires? Of course I could. Of course I can. You say no to people. You don't want to do business with them. You don't want to be involved with it. No, I'm not interested in that. I'm not comfortable, whatever it is. Discrimination is not always a bad word. It's only when you discriminate for the wrong reasons. And what has happened here with the secular, I was going to say the secular left, but that's a redundancy. With the left is they have buffaloed people into believing that sexual preference is a human right, and therefore, if you deny somebody something because of sexual preference, that's the same as denying somebody something because of skin color, for example. It's just not, but it's almost second nature for people to think that way nowadays, just because of the rhetoric and everything. Listen, I got to run, Matthias. Okay.
Okay, thank you for the insight.
Yeah, it's good chatting with you, and I guess I did most of the talking that time, but that's about normal. All right, Jason and Maui, we'll be getting to you in just a moment. Hang on. Greg Koukl, Stand to Reason. Stay with us.
You can take STR with you through our apps for iPhone, Android, and iPad, available for free from iTunes or the Android market. You can listen live to STR's weekly webcast, to podcast archives by all of our STR speakers, check the STR blog, and access timely and practical resources on many subjects, including the latest Solid Ground, Greg's mentoring letters, and much, much more. You'll have STR resources at your fingertips in a clean layout with great features and functionality. It's free, so download the app today through iTunes or the Android market, and start carrying STR with you everywhere you take your phone. Just one more way that STR is seeking to increase your knowledge, wisdom, and character.
Final segment this hour on Stand to Reason. Let's quickly go to Mr. Maui. That would be Jason. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Greg. It's great to talk to you again.
Thank you.
Definitely want to just say hello from the Hope Chapel church family.
Oh,
to you.
super,
Yeah.
super. Yeah, well, give them all my best. I think of them frequently. Every time I give one talk, and I gave it last weekend at a Sunday service. I talk about my dear friend Craig Englert, who was my discipler, changed my life, so set me on the right trajectory. A lot of that was putting his boot in my backside, but that was good.
Yes, yes, and I definitely appreciate him as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got to come down here, whether it be for an invite or just vacation. You know, hard to say no.
Love to see you all again. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, my question had to do with you had. I think it might have been a couple shows back. You were talking about different approaches to the moral argument,
Mm-hmm.
Ways to ground morality, and you had brought up Sam Harris and his approach that he takes in the moral landscape,
Mm-hmm.
and the particulars of how he chooses to try and ground morality. And you had kind of said something to the effect of, well, there's the classic moral arguments, and then there's Sam Harris's approach. That's a little different. And
Mm-hmm.
I was just hoping if you could maybe give, I guess, as much as you understand it, a summary of how he approaches it, and then kind of a tactical way for us as Christians to respond if someone holds that particular view.
Yeah, I think I can do it justice without too much difficulty. He says, Sam Harris, one of the new atheists, says it is possible for us to have objective morality without any reference to God. For example, he says, we can all agree that at the foundation of the moral project is human flourishing. Human flourishing is our goal. That is the goal of morality. Now, is it possible to come up with dictums of sorts that are directives regarding human flourishing without making any reference to God or having any dependence upon God? And he said, well, of course you can. You can say, if we do this X, then it is more likely to produce human flourishing than Y. Y would be less flourishing. X would be more flourishing, each being some kind of objective criterion. Therefore, since human flourishing is about morality, is the foundation of morality, and I can give you an objective criterion to increase human flourishing, then I've given you objective morality without any necessity of having God ground the project. I think that's a fair assessment or a fair description of his view. Now, are you with me so far on that, Jace?
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate.
Okay,
all right. I understand it as well.
So there are a couple of things that I want to say just to make an observation. How does he start? He starts with human flourishing.
That's an assumption. He's already decided that.
He has already assumed a moral good as the foundation of the enterprise.
He's begging the question. Yeah.
Exactly right. Right from the outset, he is begging the question. He smuggles morality in immediately at the beginning. He said, now we got this human flourishing thing. We can all agree on that. The question isn't whether we can all agree on it. The question is what makes human flourishing a moral good to begin with.
Right.
And that's where the discussion ought to be. On what take of materialism does human flourishing attain objective, transcendent moral status?
Mm-hmm.
And he does no work on that at all. He just assumes it. And then he takes us into really what turns out to be a kind of utilitarian venture. Now, in his case, the goods is moral flourishing. So those are moral ends. And he's looking kind of what are the things that we do that we can identify as objective steps to get the moral end of human flourishing. So maybe it's not as precisely utilitarian as it is, I'm going to just call it consequentialist.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you live in Maui? In Kihei?
No, in Wailuku.
Okay, so what is the best way? What is the right way to get to Hana?
Yeah, that's the Hana Highway.
That's the Hana Highway. That loop-de-loop-de-loop-de-loop.
Yeah,
you get dizzy all the way there. But that's not the only way. You can go the other way.
Yes, you can.
I've actually done it. You can go Kihei, and you can go around that side, the dark side of the moon.
Yeah, it's more fun that way. You got to have a good truck.
Yeah, you got to have a really good truck and some extra spare tires. But notice how my language, I said, what is the right way to get to Hana?
Right.
And you gave me a certain route that is the most expeditious way. And so you mean it's right in the sense of being expeditious. Now, if what I was interested in is adventure and not expedition, I would take the other route, and that would be the right way for adventure. So notice how in neither case does the word right mean morally right.
Yeah.
It means functional right. It means the most. It means the correct way to get the particular thing you want. But when we say correct, we don't mean morally correct. We mean
it's not right or wrong. It's like picking ice cream flavors. Just sounds arbitrary.
No, it's not. It's not quite like that. And this is where he is right that he has an objective standard, but he's not talking about morality.
Yes.
He's talking about consequence. So if I say, what is the fastest way to get to Hana? You'd say there's only one right route, and that is the Hana Road.
Yes.
Okay, so what is the safest way to get to Hana? There's only one right route, the Hana Road. But you don't mean right morally, so that if the person went the other route, Kihei and through the lava field there, that means that they are wrong, they are morally incorrect, but rather that they did not take the safest or the most expeditious route. It was incorrect in that sense. So it is objective, but it is objective for a consequentialist view, not a moral view. This is the problem with Sam Harris's approach. First, he smuggles morality in at the front end without justifying it, and that's what the whole debate is about. So his approach is circular. And then he gives you objective standards that are consequentialist and not moral.
Yeah, those are really good distinctions there, Greg.
Yeah. So you there you go. And one other thing just to chew on for Sam Harris, and that is that he believes, since he's a materialist, I think rightly believes that we have no free will. We are utterly and completely determined. Now, it just seems to me that any kind of genuine morality requires a fairly robust sense of human freedom, or else morality means nothing. If we're just sophisticated dominoes falling, then what directions we fall is irrelevant. And that's what it amounts to on a materialist view of reality. So,
yeah, that's very helpful, Greg. I don't know if you have time, but I just want to get your take on one other thing, if possible.
Go ahead.
What do you think about the kind of approach to apologetics that's kind of been called presuppositional? This would be, Greg Bahnsen, Cornelius Van Til,
John Frame.
That's even one vein of presuppositional. There's another one too, but those particular ones, there's some Christians who really, try and champion that approach to apologetics, and with the desire that they want to, as 1 Peter 3 says, set Christ apart as Lord in their hearts first, that he's the foundation to reason, morality, science, logic, all those kinds of things. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot I could say about this, and it's a little bit of a rarefied discussion because it really trades on theological and philosophical issues that are a little bit complicated or complex. I can say something about it, but for clarification's sake, and Bahnsen and Van Til, who was kind of the father of this general approach, and John Frame, these are all kind of could I call them classical presuppositionalists? They're the standard form of presuppositionalism, and presuppositionalism and everything else, other forms of evidentialism like classical apologetics, historical apologetics, all these other things, these are all kind of can be lumped in one group as opposed to presuppositionalism. They really stand on a very different theological foundation from each other. It is not just a matter of of using different techniques, because frankly, I use presuppositional techniques.
I know you do.
Yeah. So I think, and so did Francis Schaeffer, who I was a student of, at a distance, but he influenced me a lot, and he studied under Van Til, but he did not share all of Van Til's ideas. Nor would I say that he is a thoroughgoing presuppositionalist. He believed in common ground between believers and non-believers, and this is something largely rejected by presuppositionalists. So let me just say this, that I think the presuppositional approach is theologically noble, as you intimated by your citation of the 1 Peter 3, set apart, sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. And what they want to do is they want to start with, just like in their soteriology, because they're all Reformed, they're all Calvinist,
right?
They want to start with God as the first step, as the first being. And since God is necessary for reason, rationality, all these other things that anyone would have to use to argue against God, God is the logically necessary thing that must come before.
Right. The precondition for intelligibility.
Exactly.
That's what
right.
I've heard it. Yeah.
That's precondition of intelligibility, right? And this is what the transcendental argument entails. What needs to be in place in order for you to argue against God? God needs to be in place, and so you have to sit in God's lap to slap his face, kind of thing. And I agree with them that God is the precondition of intelligibility. However, they presume that you have to start. The place that you have to start metaphysically is the place that you must therefore start epistemologically. That is, with the process of knowing. And I don't think that's correct, nor do I think starting with the non-believer and his world and common ground and all those other things is somehow putting logic and reason above God. Any more than than requiring that you have to learn how to speak English before you can read the Bible, the Word of God, puts grammar above God. Yeah. So I don't agree with their general take on this, that you've got to start with God and go from there. I don't see Jesus doing that, quite frankly. I don't see the apostles doing that. So I don't buy the system as a whole. I do think some of the techniques, like the transcendental argument, is good and useful. But after all, it is an argument,
Right.
I take it as a kind of evidence, to argue the necessity of God.
Yes.
And so it strikes me, even with all the falderah, about starting with God, that they are still starting with that person's ability to reason and giving them a rational argument that entails the notion of non-contradiction to make its point, in order to show that the atheist is wrong and the presuppositionalist Christian is right. So for all their talk, it still seems like they're giving arguments. So anyway, not that they don't give arguments, but it seems like they're largely doing the same thing. And so that's my take on it, Jason.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's been very helpful, and definitely, just to echo all the other callers, I always appreciate your ministry, Greg, and definitely don't be a stranger.
Okay, all right. Thanks so much, and give my best to the crowd, okay?
All right, take care. Thank you.
Okay, Jason, I appreciate that. Well, that's it for us, friends. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'm Greg Koukl for Stand to Reason, Give 'em Heaven this week, all right? Bye-bye now.